Hey everybody, this is your welcome to week 4 video. We're zipping right along. We're already in week 4. I think that's pretty impressive. So as always, thank you for your hard work. So many of you are putting in so much time and effort, and I'm enjoying seeing you in office hours and seeing the work that you're submitting. So great job. Thank you for still hanging with us. I'm really impressed with what you've been able to do so far. So I want to talk about a few logistics. I want to reflect on some of the things we talked about this past week, give you a sense of what's coming in this next week, and then talk about graphics of the day. That's what I'm going to do in this video. So first, in terms of logistics, thanks for your flexibility. If you were someone affected by holiday weekend related changes, we'll be back to normal this week in terms of labs and office hours. I think it's a good time to take a moment to reflect on how your own time management went this week. So take a moment and just tell yourself honestly, were you somebody who was ready for both labs, right? Did you finish the videos due before each lab, prior to the lab, so that you could fully participate in the lab and get what you're supposed to get out of it, right? As I think you're probably noticing on most of the assignments, there's a question that we spend a bunch of time on in one lab, a question we spend a lot of time on another lab, and then often another question that's for your own time, right? We're working very hard to give you opportunities to be supported. So tell yourself honestly, were you ready, right? And maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is there's a way you can schedule your study time during the week or your module watching time during the week, so that you are able to let us help you more, right? Because that will decrease the total amount of time that you need to get these assignments done. So that's our moment of reflection. One thing that's coming up this week, if you look at the quiz I posted, is an anonymous feedback survey. That's because we're getting close to halfway through the summer. So please do fill that out. It says kind of the obvious things, right? What are we doing that you like? What suggestions do you have for changes we could make? Those could be changes that would be possible to implement, changes we could make right away, or perhaps you have a suggestion we could implement in a future summer. And I'd of course love to hear those as well. We'll do something SEQ-like at the end of the summer as well. So you'll have chances to give us feedback, of course. You can also expect some feedback from us, kind of around the same time, right? So around a week from now, you will get an email from me, and it'll basically say you are on track for a certificate, or here are some things you can do to make sure you're on track for a certificate, right? Those are pretty much the options, right? So you shouldn't expect, a letter grade, anything like that. But I know that sometimes, you get an 8 out of 10 in a quiz, and you say, wait a second, what does that mean, right? It's totally fine. But, that I'm just going to send you kind of a midsummer email to let you know that you're on track or not. That's what you should expect. All right. So thinking about this past week, great work. Everything looked really good. We, as you know, recently sent back the assignment 2 feedback. So looking back to that one common issue across everybody's assignment almost was a struggle with learning how to write a sentence, a conclusion sentence after a hypothesis test. And there's 2 different parts of that are hard, right? There is remembering to write, well, maybe 3. There's remembering to write a sentence at all. There is remembering to include the context, right? And there's trying to get away from some of this boilerplate template language that makes you sound like you're writing an intro stats textbook, right? So first of all, remembering to write a sentence at all, right? If you're going to become somebody who produces data analyses or deals with data ever, right, you have to be able to communicate those results to others. And so that means you don't end with P equals 0.03, but rather you end with a sentence, right, or several sentences, and also a graphic, and also a discussion, etc. So what we're trying to do here is give you an opportunity to learn how to be somebody who makes the report that comes along with the data analysis. Okay, but then also writing about the context. So if you are writing about, for example, whether private college tuition versus public college tuition is more, then the conclusions that you write should be about tuition, right? They shouldn't be about groups. They should be about colleges. They shouldn't be about amounts. They should be about dollars, right? You should actually use the words that are in the context that you're talking about. And then getting away from this boilerplate language, you will not find academic articles that end with, therefore we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Rather, they will say something like, we don't have enough evidence to conclude that private colleges on average cost more than public colleges, right? Or instead of we reject the null hypothesis, they might say we have strong evidence that there is a difference between the mean tuition at private colleges and the mean tuition at public colleges. Parentheses, P equals 0.02, something like that. right? That's what you'd expect to see. But phrases like reject the null hypothesis, or even the phrase null hypothesis, you don't see the phrase null hypothesis in an academic article or any kind of article, any kind of report about a test, right? That is something that you kind of define as part of a statistics class problem, but not this class, maybe an intro stats class, right? It's crucial to know what the null hypothesis is when you're conducting a test, but I want you to practice the skill of writing about it. We'll continue to give you feedback, right? Writing about it in a way that gets away from that boilerplate language. So include a sentence, make it about the context, and watch out for the phrases that are not, that make you sound like you're an intro stats textbook. So what can you write? So if you have a situation where you are not going to reject the null, so you have a big p-value, language that I suggest would be things like, we can't rule out the possibility that private colleges and public colleges have the same mean tuition. Or you can say, the data is consistent with the possibility that the means are the same for private colleges and public colleges. If you have a small p-value and you are rejecting null, you can say something like, we have strong evidence that there is a difference between the mean public college and the mean private college. Now, that's actually not enough. What you really want to say, and I'm just making up the number here, is a statement that includes your estimates. You could say something like, we have strong evidence there's a difference of about $15,000 between the annual tuition of private colleges and public colleges. Parentheses, P less than 0.001, comma, 95% CI, confidence interval, equals lower bound, comma, upper bound. In other words, often you write the sentence, you include your best guess at the estimate in the sentence, and maybe in parentheses, you include the p-value and a 95% confidence interval. That's actually pretty typical. If you are writing about the confidence interval itself, I know the language can be tricky. One option is to say just a 95% confidence interval for the difference in mean private versus mean public tuition is parentheses 5,000 comma 15,000 or whatever. So that's always okay to say, a 95% confidence interval for the whatever estimand is. Okay. If you want to write something that explains the intuition a little bit more, you have to be careful because you can't suggest that the estimand could take on different possible values, right? So you can't say there's a 95% chance that the true mean, the true difference in mean private versus public tuition falls in this range. That's not true in the context that we've developed here, because the true difference in means is not random. So it has no probability of taking on any particular quantity, or it has a 100% probability of being whatever it is. We just don't know what it is. So instead, you could say, if you wanted to, something like the interval $10,000 comma $20,000 has a 95% probability of including the true difference in mean private versus public college tuition, right? Again, the interval lower bound comma upper bound has a 95% chance of covering whatever the estimand is. That's a true statement because the interval is what's random, right? There's different possible samples from the population. Therefore, there are different possible intervals you could have obtained. So what's random is the interval. So if you write a sentence that includes the implication that the interval is what's random, that's okay to do. But again, you can also write a sentence just about your conclusion and put the p-value and the confidence interval in parentheses, or you can say a 95% confidence interval for whatever the estimate is lower bound comma upper bound. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about that. One small comment, just again, as we look at the feedback for that, that assignment 2. So one of the things I said in those videos is that when you're doing a rank sum test, it's equivalent to use the difference in mean ranks versus just the sum of the ranks in one of the groups. I saw many people actually do the difference in mean ranks. That may even be what I put in the solutions, but I want to point out that the rank sum is often much, much easier. And that's why it's used, right? If you have two statistics that are equivalent or that lead to equivalent results, you use the simpler one. So the rank sum test is called the rank sum test because the conventional statistic to use is the sum of the ranks in the smaller group as opposed to the difference in mean ranks. But again, the intuition for those two test statistics is the same and the tests are equivalent. All right, that's what I wanted to say about assignment 2. You've been working on submitting today, if you're watching this on Wednesday, the assignment 3. Now I want to look ahead for a moment to assignment 4. So one of the things that is going to be really important on assignment 4 is data cleaning. Data cleaning is the process of dealing with your data and getting it into a format that is ready for your analysis. This is not a trivial thing. This is not trivial. In fact, it's often the hardest part. Can it get Tedious? Yes. Can it be boring sometimes? Yes. Do a lot of people really like it? Yes. If you get a job after college, or an internship sometime that is based on the skills you develop related to data, your first job is not going to be, the person who designs a fancy model, or you're not going to be tasked with, you know, being the one who makes the most, the visualization that's published on your first day of the job. That's not what it is. Eventually you'll get there. Okay. And it's important to have those skills and show people that you have those skills, and you'll be recognized for those skills. However, probably what you'll do first, if you get a job related to data, is cleaning the data. That's what students are hired for, right? And it's a really crucial skill to get your foot in the door, and also to have, right? So that you can be a person who can deal with your own data and doesn't have to always rely on others in the future. Data cleaning is probably the most crucial skill and useful and applicable skill you'll gain in this course. So please bear with me through that video and through the assignment about it. Because again, the skill you're gaining is the ability to actually deal with real data, as opposed to wait for somebody else to make the data look like it came from a textbook. Similarly, there's a module on tidyverse, which is a set of commands for basically tidying your data, right? So they're kind of cleaning. You'll see that tidyverse basically is a parallel set of commands to some commands that you've learned already. I personally don't use tidyverse a ton, but for certain things it's crucial. You may be a person who loves the structure and syntax of tidyverse, or you may say, ugh, what is this? And it's totally your call. Obviously, when I ask you to use it, please use it. But from this week onward, right, now you just have more tools in your toolbox, and you can decide when you want to use tidyverse commands versus other commands. All right, now I want to move on to graphics of the day. I need to share my screen here. Okay, so I won't necessarily do these in the order they originally posted. Let's see, but they're close. So the first couple were maps. There's some themes in here this week, which is nice. Helen is choosing these and I think making some themes. So I looked at this one and said, what is even going on? This one looks maybe more like an illustration than a map I'm supposed to learn from, right? I don't think I can read this key particularly well. But what I will say is the skill of making a map at all is an important one. And that is one of the skills you have the option of choosing. We'll get to some modules in future weeks where you get to choose from a set of skills. The ability to make a map and point out a few things on it, right, is really useful. And so I appreciate that this is a map. And that's what I'll say about that one. This one's also a map. And I really like this one. I like this one because you can tell, well, actually, now I'm questioning myself. What can I tell here? Yeah, you can tell that it's the world, right? I'm not wrong about that, right? Yeah, no. So here's North America and here's South America, right? You can see vaguely, right, the different continents. We have these shapes. And so this is nice because the fact that we as people in the world recognize a map of the world allows us to have some general sense of what we're seeing here, right? We know where to look for different countries. We know what we're seeing. But also, we can scroll over and get particular information here, or the size of the circles is related to the medal counts. So this is often useful. You may have seen maps like this related to elections, where, for example, you could show the electoral college in the US by making each state's area proportional to the number of electoral votes it gets, things like that. The fact that people are used to seeing things in a map can often help you display data. Because if you put things on the map, people know what they're looking at. It's kind of a way to hide another dimension in your picture without people even realizing it, because they already know, again, where to look for certain things. Right? I like this one. All right. So this one's not a map. What do we have here? So this looks like World Press Freedom Index score versus rule of law. One thing I'll say while we're looking at this one, when you're labeling plots, when you're looking at scattered plots, be aware that the you always say y-axis versus x-axis. So don't put the other way. This is not rule of law versus World Press Freedom Index score, but rather World Press Freedom Index score versus rule of law. That's how we talk about it. We always say y versus x. So I think this graphic is an example of using color and labels on a plot well. I do wish there were some labels, some axis labels, right? I don't know exactly what I'm looking at. I don't see any numbers on the axes. But I like the way the countries are labeled. Now, if they wanted us to really be able to identify all these countries, they could have put them on a map, right? This relates to this one in that way, right? One way to show numbers for a bunch of countries is to organize them on a map. But this one, they wanted to focus on these two variables. And so instead, you can see the abbreviations for the countries right on the points. On this week's homework, you have the option to make a graphic kind of like this, where you represent, I think it's each state by the initials for the state. And that can be a really helpful thing to do, right? Because if you're looking at this one and you might recognize that JPN means Japan, right? That immediately gives you a sense of where Japan falls in terms of these other countries. And the rollover is an extra nice thing here. But I do like this plot. I think it makes good use of the labels directly on the points in a scatter plot. In R, the command for doing that is called text. So just like you can make a plot by saying X variable and Y variable, you can use text and then give it the X coordinates, the Y coordinates, and a vector of what text should appear at each point. So that's something you can play with again on this week's homework. All right, this one, I know I'm supposed to scroll down to which ones are threatened. There we go. This seems like this is kind of gratuitous animation here, right? So I like that it seems like this is following our principle that every element of a graphic should be proportional to the number it represents, but I don't really know why they're wiggling around. I'm not loving that. But I do kind of like this in general, scrolling through and seeing these different numbers. I guess my thought here is that this particular page maybe strikes a balance between showing data and making a pretty illustration. It's a little bit too far on the illustration side for my taste. All right, next I've got a bunch of bar plots. When I looked at this one, I immediately knew whose it was because I know we have a student in the class who's been studying Jane Austen. So one really nice thing about these bar plots is that the numbers, I know it's small here on the screen, the numbers are labeled directly on the bars, right? One thing I think is a little bit difficult is reading the legend, right? Because actually this legend is very repetitive, right? Probably whatever software this is made in, it was hard to make the legend not show up quite so many times, right? But that's repetitive. But I do like the labels directly under. One thing to notice about a bar plot is there's really not that many numbers that you can show here, right? So for each of these characters, it looks like you can show subjective event count and objective event count, right? But there's only two numbers. So each of these bars shows much less information than, for example, a box plot, if we were trying to show continuous data. A box plot shows at least 5 numbers, right? Median, quartiles, min, and max. But a bar plot never shows more than 1 min or 1 max per bar. So often it's kind of a waste of space. Here's one, although again, I think these plots can be effective because these are counts. There may not be anything else to represent there. Okay, looking at this one, number of people who like these different fruits. The colors are, I mean, I guess they're supposed to match what the fruits are, right? But I think the colors here are a little bit gratuitous. Again, it's leaning toward the illustration side. If the colors don't represent something, don't use them. Every element, here's a principle for you, every element of a graphic should mean something. You don't change the colors just for fun. You don't change the symbols just for fun. One thing they've done here is they have rotated the bar plot to make more room for the labels, right? If you had this bar plot with the bars going vertically, you would not have room to write the word apple, orange, banana, kiwi fruit, etc. And so this is a common and very nice solution to rotate the plot so that it's easy to make enough room to write those axis labels there. And so that is something that is nicely done here. I think in the function bar plot in R, the argument is just called, har is for horizontal equals true. And then it becomes horizontal. All right, here's another plot, and I like this one next because it's doing the same thing, right? It's got bars, but there wasn't enough room to write business management administration under some bar, so they rotated the whole thing, and I think that's very effective. This is also an example of a stacked bar chart, although the stacks are sideways, which we talked about last week. So note that there was a choice to put women, the women category in the bottom, so it's very easy to compare how women break down across these different majors, but it's much harder to compare, for example, whether there are more men in biology versus, say, finance. Like that is not easily readable off this plot. And so that's a choice that was made. But you can see women and you can see the total, and it has this nice rotation, which I think is effective. So I'll stop there. I really love the discussions I'm seeing about the graphics of the day. We'll keep them coming, and I can tell by the graphics you're producing that you're internalizing these principles, which is awesome. So great job with that. Good luck this week, and I hope to see you at office hours.